So last week I made a video about Netflix's Death Note and why I thought it missed the mark in a lot of ways. While not terrible per se, it was lacking in a lot of areas. Reading articles and reviews, one topic that keeps coming up is, why are American adaptations of Japanese properties always so bad? And I mean, yeah, you got Dragon Ball, Ghost in the Shell, Resident Evil, Death Note, and probably a whole bunch of others I can't really be bothered to think of right now. But always, without fail, they are at best underwhelming and at worst just downright terrible. Now this got me thinking, we know Hollywood versions of anime never work, but why? Why exactly is this the case, and why can no one seem to crack it? Now, since these are all creative, subjective works, there isn't going to be one end-all answer, because everyone interprets things differently. But after doing some digging, I came to a conclusion about the reason why American adaptations of Japanese anime will always be terrible, and it's actually pretty simple. The way stories are told is fundamentally different, particularly when it comes to the idea of the main character. As an easy example, let's just go back for a second and take a look at Death Note. In the original Japanese version, Light is rich, affluent, good-looking, very smart, but altogether bored. In the Netflix adaptation, Light is financially lacking, average-looking, kinda smart, but altogether just an underachiever. The journey of these two characters, if you trace it out on a line, is more or less opposite. While Light Yagami starts at the top, his life is pretty great, and he gets the Death Note and his life is still great for a while. From there, his journey is a tragedy, with things getting worse and worse until at the end, well, things don't really go so well for him. Light Turner's journey, however, is a mirrored opposite version of this. He starts at the bottom, the underdog, and when he gets the Death Note, his life improves exponentially. Things of course end up getting worse, and then at the end we're not really sure if they get better or worse after that. But putting that aside for a second, the part I want to focus on is this part at the beginning. One of the key differences in Western versus Eastern storytelling is usually, though not always, where our heroes start their journey. The Western world, Hollywood in particular, has this kind of obsession with the story of the underdog. The story of the ragtag colonists who fought against the world's biggest empire and won their independence, or the employee who gets revenge on their boss, or the nerdy kid who gets revenge on the jock and gets the cheerleader in the end. All of these are deeply ingrained in how the West, again Hollywood in particular, tells their stories. In contrast, Eastern storytelling, or in this case Japan, comes at their heroes from a different angle. Much like ancient myths, the main characters start out already great, already skilled or strong or smart or whatever their thing is. The idea of the Ronin samurai who just so happens to be the best swordsman since forever, or the high school student who just happens to be smarter than the entire world combined, and so on. Western storytelling is typically, though not always, about the hero's struggle against an outside force, the nerd who beats up the bully, the employee who stands up to the boss, David versus Goliath. I think you get the idea. We love stories about characters like Peter Parker or really any rags to riches story because we love this idea that all of our struggles in life are ultimately worth it. You see, almost everyone in some way sees themselves as an underdog who one day will achieve greatness. And our stories, in many ways, reflect this idea. In Japanese stories, this isn't always the case. Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop is right out the gate, smart, clever, witty, dexterous, skilled in gunplay and martial arts. Instead of being a nobody who ends up achieving greatness, he is great and just keeps doing great things. The outside opposition is little more than a distraction. The real struggle, though, is internal. Despite, or maybe because of, his greatness, Spike has a past that he can't escape. Behind the facade of the cool, sarcastic character is a heavy pain that he can't get away from. This is why Vicious, the villain with a really on-the-nose name, can get to him in a way that no other antagonist can. Vicious knows his past, exploits it, and hurts Spike internally rather than externally. Well, I mean, he stabs him at the end, but you know what I mean. Vash the Stampede from Trigun is another perfect example. A superhuman alien baby thing who can take down entire armies without firing a single bullet. Externally, he's invincible, but internally, he has an ongoing struggle with his past and who he is as a person. Villains like Knives and Legato don't have to fight Vash directly because they go after his real weakness, the one place he's vulnerable. I mean, you've got Rurouni Kenshin, you've got Dragon Ball, One Piece, One Punch Man, Bleach, the list goes on. Most of the time, not always, but mostly, the heroes in Japanese stories are already great when the story begins. They are the best detective, the best martial artist, the best demon hunter, or whatever their shtick is. And their journey is not so much about achieving something, but usually involves coming to terms with some kind of internal issue. At the beginning of Pokemon, for example, Pikachu is way stronger and smarter than any other Pokemon. The struggle isn't necessarily about whether Ash or Pikachu are strong enough to beat up whoever it is they're fighting, but how strong their friendship bond is. Again, the struggle is not always, but usually internal. The external opposition is oftentimes just decoration or a vehicle to move the plot along. It's this fundamental difference in storytelling, among other things, that's given us the recent Hollywood anime adaptation flops like Death Note or Ghost in the Shell. The idea of the hero's journey, the notion of what obstacle the heroes are supposed to overcome is, in many cases, completely different. Now, thanks to the success of comic book movies, movie companies seem to be missing the whole point when adapting Japanese anime into live-action movies. Superhero movies are largely a case of spectacle over substance. While I enjoy comic book movies as much as the next person, it's really no secret that storytelling takes a backseat to explosions and special effects against really great-looking set pieces. And that, in and of itself, is fine. We all know what we're getting into, and it's great. The thing is, though, for a lot of Japanese anime and manga, like I said, the struggle of the main characters is usually internal, either mental or emotional or some combination. While the original Japanese versions of Ghost in the Shell or Death Note, for example, certainly have some great visual effects and designs, the main reason people remember these so fondly has little to nothing to do with any of that. It's the characters, their relationships, the mental and emotional stimulation instead of just the visual. When these properties get translated over into Hollywood blockbusters, it seems the mentality is to approach them the same way as a Marvel or DC movie, to shift the struggle from internal to external. Because that's what's worked pretty well for comic book movies. But this will never work because the foundation of the anime or manga in question is usually completely different. To come back around to Netflix's Death Note just one more time, in the original Japanese version, the main point of the story is not the Death Note. It's about the psychological battle between Light and L. The Death Note is really just a prop for cool effect. But in the Netflix adaptation, the Death Note becomes the main focus. And so the movie ends up losing the very thing that people liked about the original. So like I said before, maybe cartoons should really just stay cartoons. Now, obviously, there's exceptions on both sides. You can point out some anomalies on the American Hollywood side or on the Japanese side, of course, but I think if you look at the general trend, I looked at like 30 or 40 different kinds of anime stories and manga stories, then also about 20 or 30 different kind of American movies. And I think the general trend you'll see is definitely that Japanese stories tend to go this way, whereas American stories tend to go this way. Hollywood stories are generally kind of have this sort of underdog type of tone to them. There's always kind of this external struggle, whereas Japanese stories tend to be a little bit more like myths, where it's like this person's just awesome and the struggle is internal about them and it's not necessarily about what they're fighting. Like I mentioned Ghost in the Shell, for example. Ghost in the Shell, of course, is very famous for its visual and art style and use of color and all that type of stuff, but the visual aspect supplements the story. It supplements the sort of internal struggle for identity and what are memories, what is the meaning of self and all that. Whereas if you look at movies, like, superhero movies or whatever, it's like Hollywood movies, especially recently, are very much about like the visual spectacle aspect is like the main draw. Like most of the time when people go to watch like Transformers or, a lot of comic book movies and things like that, most of the time the story is kind of whatever, because every superhero movie kind of has the same story arc, like pretty much, and everyone goes there for the crazy fight scenes and the cool CG and the cool graphics and all that, mainly, and story is usually kind of on the back burner. Whereas in a lot of Japanese stories, the visual aspect is usually used to complement the story, not overtake it. Japanese stories usually have a lot of internal struggle about like, philosophical, thematic elements and this type of stuff, and they use cool visuals to like show that. Whereas more often than not always, but often, in Hollywood movies, the visual aspect is the main aspect. With this video, I wanted to try to not necessarily dumb the visuals down, but I wanted to have the visuals have purpose. Like, I wanted everything, or as much as possible, to be logical. Like, instead of just things appearing and disappearing and then kind of looking cool but not having much reason, like no logic, I wanted to be like, so this thing comes up and then disappears, which pulls this down, and then we zoom into this picture, which brings up another picture, and then, we zoom into Scarlett Johansson's hair, which then brings it's like, kind of having, it's hard to explain, but hopefully you saw it when I did it. Try and have a logic to why things are happening as much as possible. Obviously, sometimes things just happen because it's cool. You know, so instead of just relying on like the big set pieces, I wanted to give things a purpose, even if it makes them look simpler in a way. So anyway, if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. I have these type of videos coming every Friday. You know, follow me on Twitter. I basically just tweet pictures of dogs and cats and stuff. So, I mean, you know, who can go wrong with that? And of course, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next week. Reading articles and reviews, one topic that keeps coming up is One topic that keeps coming up is why are American adaptations of Japanese properties always so... Why are American adaptations of... We know Hollywood versions of anime will never work. But why? But why? But why? But why? But why? But why? Why? In the original Japanese version, light... That sounds like a game show host. In the original Japanese version, Light is rich, affluent. Wow. Lit? Huh. Light is rich, affluent. Boy. Now, I like superhero movies as much as the next... What? What is happening? Spider-Man, no! Spider-Man, come back! When you skip leg day.